From deep in the heart of Central Texas, it's the Best of the Outdoors podcast with Dustin Vaughn Warnke. Brought to you by Grim Reaper Broadheads. Watch 'em drop. Gold Tip, the toughest arrow you'll ever shoot. Gilly Monster Outdoors and Vapor Trail Outdoors. World-class hunting and fishing products. Striper Express with Bill and Chris Carey on Lake Texoma. Vineyard Max Deer Products and Warnke Enterprises, your full stack digital and media production marketing agency with a specialty in the outdoors. Welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to download this show, listen on YouTube, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for doing so, as I thank you just about every time I open this show, and I've got a gem of a guest this time, guys. Larry Weishuhn, pre-recorded interview that I did with him back in March of this year. So I'm releasing this in June. And what an absolute fun interview. We talk about life. I am also using this content for my other podcast called the Empowered Life with Dustin Vaughn Warnke. You can find that just, like you can find this podcast on your favorite podcast player that you're listening to right now, or however you are digesting this show in video or audio format. And, or DustinsPodcast.com for the Empowered Life, or thebestoftheoutdoors.podbean.com for this show, which is one of the links that you can get to this show directly through Podbean, where it is hosted. And some of you guys know I do audio production for Larry Weishuhn. It's called DSC's Campfires with Larry Weishuhn. It comes out every Wednesday. And at the beginning of every segment, or the first segment of Luke Clayton's radio show called Catfish Radio with Luke Clayton and Friends, that's on Carbon TV, as well as Larry's podcast. And then A Sportsman's Life, which is co-hosted by three guys. That's Luke, Larry, and Jeff Rice. I know all three of them, work with them very closely in different projects and everything like that. Absolutely incredible shows, all of them, as far as TV or podcast format. And Sportsman's Life can be found on YouTube or Carbon TV. Very, simple show, new show every week, and what happened that week was probably what actually was filmed the week before. I mean, it's very cool what you can do with streaming outdoor media now and going live with something that you recorded the week before, with post-production time and all that other fun stuff. And podcasting works a lot of the same way, but I really sat on the show for a little while. Wanted to pick the right time to release it, kind of during the summer here, when we're not doing a ton of stuff in the outdoors because it's hot, except for maybe fishing, and just to give you a gem of a listening piece of great insights from a guy who has hunted all over the world, who has been on TV all over the world, who has written books and articles and done hundreds of podcasts. I've been on one of Larry's podcasts that you may listen to, I guess back in the September, one of the September shows of 2024. I think it was the 250th episode, 250. Really fun opportunity to sit down with Larry and talk about not just the outdoors and hunting and fishing and hook and bullet stuff like we normally do on this show, but also to just visit about life and visit about what matters, what means something to us as we get older, as we age, as we leave the legacy behind for future outdoor generations that aren't even born yet, your grandchildren's grandchildren. That's the way I like to look at the outdoor legacy. And I have a video that I'm putting together. I'll also air that in podcast form, about a talk that I gave kind of on this same subject about leaving a Christian outdoor legacy, for the future generations, and not making it about glorifying yourself and catching the biggest and the best, and catching and killing and all the stuff that we sometimes do in the outdoors. But that's not what the outdoors is all about. It's about the experience, which is one thing that has been the pinnacle of this show since I started it. I'm not about going out there and killing trophy. I mean, there's so many other podcasts you can go find out there about, killing a 300-inch, whitetail or 500 class red stag in New Zealand or whatever. That's all cool, For me, it's more about the experience of communing with nature, about understanding intelligent design and how God designed all this stuff. Those are the things that are more important to me in the long run, because after we're all gone and after all the trophies and everything like that are left on our walls, in our homes and that kind of stuff, what's going to be important to your grandchildren's grandchildren? That's always the question that I like to ask. The deeper meaning of what makes us outdoors people, what makes us part of that cycle of life, the fact that something has to die for us to live, whether it's plant or animal based. The circle of life, those kind of things. Just very, very, very great insights for the outdoors. So anyway, if you on your favorite podcast player, however you're listening to this show, you can find Larry's podcast, DSC's Campfires with Larry Weishuhn. He has several sponsors on there as well, Mossberg and Dallas Safari Club, and a whole host of other ones. At the beginning of his show, we actually just redid his intro, so I produced that. I'm behind the scenes on that. I'm behind the scenes on Luke Clayton's show, which he is at the beginning of. First segment is always Luke and Larry's Campfire Talk. They have been doing that for 18 and a half years as of the recording of the show. And what an amazing, it's just so cool listening to two guys, talk virtually pretty much around a virtual campfire. One of Larry's great quotes is really borrowed from a poet laureate for the University of Texas from years past, and that was J. Frank Dobie. And he said that, to kind of paraphrase, life's greatest philosopher is a campfire. And I think that any of us that have been around a campfire can really relate to that. And that's one reason why Larry's podcast is called Campfires with Larry Weishuhn, or DSC's Campfires with Larry Weishuhn. And then the beginning segment, and sometimes other segments are on Luke's show as well, with just Luke and Larry. For Catfish Radio with Luke Clayton and friends, also can be found on any podcast app. And on, I think, around 30 or so terrestrial radio stations. That's another fun podcast radio show, however you listen to it. But that's heard on a couple of different, a few different states, mainly in the South, throughout, the southern United States, on terrestrial radio, and then it airs as a podcast as well the same day that it airs on terrestrial radio. So that's 4 segments. He's always on segment number 1 with Luke, doing the old virtual campfire thing, and listening to their conversations is just great. So I invite you to check all that out. Larry's website, he'll give at the end, it's LarryWeishuhn.net. If you want to also just check out Mr. Whitetail, if you just Google that, you'll see a picture of this guy. You'll see a picture of me and him in the show notes. We've done several events, even this year alone, together. Texas Outdoor Writers Association, he spoke there. I spoke there twice. Several other things that we've been involved in, including the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit. I've got some podcasts that I'm releasing from that pretty soon, and other things you can go back and listen to that Larry has been at with me, and things that I've been at without Larry, and so on and so forth. But either way, Larry in really engulfs and embraces and embodies the outdoor lifestyle that I love, about what we learn in the outdoors, about all the beautiful things that are in there. And so I really encourage you to, listen to this interview with great ears, with an open mind. And, if you learn a few things, that's great. But just think about what the outdoor legacy you want to leave for your children's grandchildren one day. What legacy are you making today with your hunting and fishing journey, with your outdoor life journey, and what you're visiting, as far as where you go, where you take the people in your life to experience God's wonderful creation. So without further ado, here is Mr. Larry Weishuhn, Mr. Whitetail. What an honor it is to have him on the podcast. What a gem of a guest he was. We talk about a lot of things around the outdoors, life, so much. I know you're going to enjoy this. So thank you so much again for watching, reading, and listening. I won't do an exit out of this podcast, so this will just end naturally. So if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Dustin at dustinsprojects.com, or Dustin at businesswithdustin.com if you want to email me. Text 512-497-7674. If you have any questions for Larry, you can always email me. I'll send those over to Larry. Work directly with him. He's on my speed dial. And what an honor it is to be around an outdoor celebrity like this. It's just great to be able to work with somebody like this personally. Big dream of mine that I never expected to come true. Somebody that I've been watching since I was a kid on TV, on the big TV networks. This is a true honor. So thank you guys so much. And again, websites, dustinsprojects.com and businesswithdustin.com. And here we go. Welcome to our podcast. Today I have an honored guest, Larry Weishuhn. Am I saying that right? Luke Clayton always tells me to say it right. Weishuhn. Weishuhn is the way I'm trying to say. It's
Larry.
just Larry. Okay, yeah. Good old Larry, Mr. Whitetail. Okay, of hunting and outdoor fame. One of the most humble outdoor celebrities I've ever met in my life, and you know who I compare that to on the other end of the spectrum. But we won't talk about that as far as guys like that. But I mean, like I said, so somebody that's accomplished as much as you have in your career, both professionally and personally. I'm just impressed to have you on the show and that you took the time to do this with me. So thank you. I appreciate you.
I appreciate the very kind words, and I'm truly honored to be on here with you. But thank you so very much for allowing me that opportunity.
So for those that don't know already, and I talk about this on both podcasts, I produce Larry's DSCs, Campfires with Larry Weishuhn. And basically, I've been doing that for, now, I guess, a year and 2 months. Is that right? We started in January of 2024.
And I wish it had been longer.
I'm glad you're happy with my work. I really am, because I love producing podcasts for you and everybody else I produce for. So it's kind of like, it's something to do every week, It's kind of like, but it never seems like a grind, just like you say, at your, how old a man are you right now, Larry?
I am 77.
77. You've got a packed schedule. You're running like full wide open, kind of like me at 45. But like you're as spry as a 20-year-old, in my opinion, as far as like the stuff that you get out there and do, hunt, fish, film, all these things. You've got multiple TV shows and tons of animals and everything like that under your belt. You've hunted all over the world. Tell me a little bit about how it was growing up. We talked about this some on the show that you interviewed me on, and I want to kind of see, just a little bit about your history.
I grew up in a very German-speaking community called Zimmerzeit, which is in the northern part of Colorado County, Texas. Used to be about 80 miles west of Houston. Now it's probably about 40 miles west of Houston, or maybe even closer than that. Grew up out in the country with a dad that loved to hunt, loved horses. He loved dogs. He really enjoyed hunting all different kinds of things, particularly if it had anything to do with hounds. And then my mom grew up also. She liked to fish and all those kind of good things, and kind of grew up, as I said, out in the country. But until I started school, just about every morning, my granddad, A.J. Oschenbeck, who's a local county commissioner, would come by and after he got the crew going on, what they were going to need to be doing for the day, and he'd stop by, or sometime he'd come by and pick me up, and we'd go get the county crew going, and then we'd come back and dig worms if it wasn't too cold, and go fishing. And so I really grew up in the outdoors when you get right down to it, between mom and dad who really enjoyed the outdoors and who appreciated the outdoors. And unfortunately, my granddad died when I was 9, and it very openly and frankly, it took me many years to forgive him for having done so. Before school started, talking about grade school, I spoke mostly German. My mom and dad spoke German all the time, and Low German, Plattdeutsch. And so
I never heard the name Plattdeutsch, but yeah, I understand what you mean. Like, we call it text German in my family, but I come from very Germanic background too.
As well too.
Low German, I've heard that too.
Low German and High German. So starting school was a little bit on the difficult side for me for several things, because I was used to roaming out in the woods. And then when school started and I had to switch over to English, between us, I literally thought I'd died and gone to hell.
Complete change of conditions. Yeah, I get that.
Life change. So, those were the early years. I grew up hunting whitetail deer. unfortunately, back when I first started hunting whitetail deer, we had very, very few deer. And if you even saw a deer track, you were a hero. And my gosh, if you ended up taking a deer during that hunting season, you were a hero beyond heroes for that year until the next year, until somebody else shot a deer.
You're only good as your last season, Larry. That's the way it goes in the hunting community for sure. So
hunting has truly changed in that respect. But growing up, I learned to respect my elders, respect my country, respect my family, respect the outdoors, and respect animals. And that's something that I truly appreciate about my upbringing, in that it gave me a better understanding about life in so many different ways. But also, when you get right down to it, a lot of times somebody will ask me a question about life, and I said, "Hey, do not forget, all life on Earth depends upon the death of another organism. Death is as much part of life as anything." And so, we had our own. We were in the chicken business, the hog business, the cattle business, and I was the automatic feeder for my dad for our chicken houses. We had our own little feedlots, and I was the chief bottle washer and carrier of feed and water kind of thing. And so I grew up strong with a rather strong work ethic as well too. And all those things later in life proved very much to be worthwhile. And I'm so appreciative of how I was able to grow up out in the country and at the time at which I did, and the things I learned from my elders, and the respect that I gained from them, and the respect that I gave them.
Sure, I understand that. And that's solid, because that's what I like to talk about really on both hot podcasts that I host myself, is where never forget where you came from. That's one of the things that I'll probably do a show on, just that, never forget your roots, no matter how big or famous or anything like that. And that's one thing I always respect about you, Larry, is that, like, you have been, you've taken all that you've achieved and everything like that and used it for good, and not just used it to self-glorify, but to glorify, the conservation of wildlife and the conservation through organizations like DSC, and the sponsors you represent and that kind of stuff, and represent them well. And that's one reason why you keep the sponsors you have for the time, because it's all about relationships, and all of life is about relationships, treating people well. And I couldn't think of a finer, celebrity or other person to have in my life than you, because, like I say, you're not the only fine person I work with in that respect, with character and integrity and honesty, but, like, you are one of the top. I produce Luke Clayton's podcast. You guys do that and radio show and everything like that for him, and Catfish Radio with Luke Clayton. And hearing you every week, like, with you guys just cut up and have a great time on segment one, and then sometimes I'll have you back on the other segments, and just talking about, like, one of the things Luke made me chuckle the other day. He was talking about I don't know if it was with you or another guest, but he was like, 165, inch deer and everything like that. And he said, well, back in my day, that was like, he just kind of made that kind of like remark about it. I thought that was just so cute. It was just like, yes, all of it has changed, but in a way, in a lot of ways for the better. In a lot of ways, it's kind of become commercialized. It's kind of become, a little bit more of a rich man's sport. And I'm trying to bring it back to, like, my personal thing is, I'll just go back to, to the basics that I started out with, and that's hunting hogs, because we've got a nuisance problem here in Texas, and with feral hogs, and you're not going to barbecue yourself out of that situation, so that's what the joke always was, turning back when I sold hog hunts, turning nature's nuisance and problem into a tasty dinner, entree. I would often say that, but for some of those that don't hunt and fish, that listen to my other podcast, you are a gem of an example of what it's like to age well. At 77 years old, you're still traveling. You've got a book schedule. You're knocking things down. And that's an inspiration for me as I get older and move past my middle ages into, my elderly years, that it's kind of like that Alan Jackson song, the older I get. I don't know if you've ever heard that song.
Oh, many times.
Oh, man. I mean, and Artie Anise from Texas Fishing Game Magazine actually introduced me to that song, a little clip of it one time or whatever. And I've kind of been hooked on that, because the older I get, I begin to realize it's not the money and stuff, it's the people you love. Like, it's the relationships you build. It's adding value to each other's lives. It's being symbiotic and not just one-sided with relationships. It's a two-way street. And that's the one thing that I've learned from you and other folks that are much, that are older than me by maybe a generation or so, at the end of the boomers, or, whatever the case may be. I recently even worked with one that was a silent generation. He passed away, I think. He was a psychiatrist. He helped me through some things. I helped him through some things. We did a website project together. And so again, I have always said since I was young, absorb the people that are beyond your years. Absorb their knowledge, absorb their skill set, and absorb their experience, so you don't make the same mistakes that they may have made, or you can make better choices for your life. So that's one thing I always advocate for, especially to younger kids that I mentor and that kind of stuff. Take care of your elders, of the people that are older than you, and learn. Don't just blow them off and say, oh, he's an old fogey or whatever. No. They've got experience about whatever life curveballs have thrown at them. And I talk about that a lot on both shows.
You mentioned that, and years ago, I worked as a wildlife biologist for the state of Texas. And every once in a while, they'd send a new biologist to me, and so I'd take him out. He new to the department, and recently hired, and I'd take him out to one or two old ranchers that I knew really well, and they were great storytellers, and they were great sources of knowledge. And I'd take them out there, and we'd sit and drink coffee and I'd listen, tell stories, and finally we'd get finished, get back in the vehicle. And a lot of the things that elderly guy told or said were a little bit contrary to some of the things that this younger guy might have learned in school. And so he'd get
college,
he'd get back in the truck with me, and I said, what do you think? He said, well, that old man doesn't really know a whole lot of things, does he? And I go, well, let me tell you, that gentleman's been on that property for the last 70 plus years. He's made a living off that property. He is a great observer of wildlife and habitat and humanity and all those other things. And you really need to pay attention to him and give him some respect, because he's been there, he's done that, and he's telling you what he has observed based upon his experience. I said, he is a real person. What he's learned didn't come out of a book. It came from life's experiences, whether it had to do with wildlife, livestock, ranching, or just simply dealing with people as well, too.
Just because so much of our life is dealing with people, and just, aside from, the animal. Like, I had a client the other day, I'm watching the phones for a roofing company I do work with, and he had to birth a cow yesterday in the middle of dealing with his roofing work. He owns a roofing company, and he had to go pull a calf yesterday. And I'm like, that's a good man. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, that's pretty multiverse. Like, I mean, here you're celebrating new life, and here I am handling your roofing calls. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a good teamwork, symbiotic relationship.
It is, there. Yes, sir.
But it's just like yesterday, they were kind of laughing at me, and I was just celebrating the miracle of life. Like, the fact that all this goes around and around in the circle of life, and you have the miracle of birth, and then you have, in some cases, the sadness of death. But like you said, when you started off, when you grew up, you learned that death was part of life. And I think that's one thing we like to forget. I personally think, like, I follow kind of the tradition of, like, the 3 human conditions the Buddha taught. And those were, we all get old, we all get sick, and we all die. He didn't realize that. The Buddha didn't realize that until he was a prince, and his protected by the walls of this kingdom and everything, as the story goes. And, like, he gets out of the castle in a chariot or whatever, and goes out and sees the world outside of the castle walls. And he was shocked. He was shocked because he saw an old man, and he was terrified, and he'd never seen an old person. And then he saw a sick man. And then on another trip, he sees a dead man on the side of the road. And, like, I mean, this was back 2,500 years ago. It's a much different time. And then he decided to leave his kingdom and become, an ascetic, and just kind of like, and that didn't work for him because he was kind of like, living off of nothing. But then he basically became, eventually the enlightened one, but had to kind of overcome the world in all of that, and realize that those are the 3 conditions that we cannot escape. That we all get old, we all get sick, and we all die. But the thing is, it's the fact that we are all in it together that joins us as a human race. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't matter about color, doesn't matter about, background and everything like that. We all have to face those 3 things. So really, we have that in common. That's kind of my point when I talk about humanity as a whole,
Exactly. And that, to me, excuse me, the growing old part, you can decide how you want to grow old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've got friends who grew old very, very quickly.
Age like
And
wine or age like milk. That's what I always say. You know,
I
you
mean,
want to age like wine. And I think you have.
they're guys like me who, until probably recently, has decided not to grow up, and I'm still haven't grown up as far as I'm concerned. I look because one of the things I truly enjoy people. I love people, and I used to get tickled because I counseled students years ago when I was at Texas A&M working with wildlife diseases, and they'd come in and I said, "Why are you in wildlife?" And they go, "Well, I love the outdoors. I love to hunt and fish, and I just don't like people." And I go, I'd grab them by the arm and I said, I'd take them to the door and I said, "We're going to go talk to your primary advisor." And he goes,
Right.
Why? And I said, "Because if you tell me you do not like people, you need to be getting in another field." I
Yeah.
said, "Because wildlife is 90% people and 10% wildlife and habitat." And to me, all that said too, life is an education. It's a great opportunity every morning to get up, and when you wake up and get up and learn what's going to happen, look for new things to happen that day, learn from what happens that day.
Right.
Sometimes you learn things that you don't want to remember maybe, or sometimes you learn things you go, "Man, I hadn't thought about it that way." And to me, that's one of the beauties of people. I learned a long time ago to listen, and I love to get people started. I used to do the Harrisburg Great American Outdoor Show back then, of just the Harrisburg show, and during the process of that, there in the week in 10 days time, there'd be 1 million people through the doors.
Right.
And back then I was in front of the TV cameras a lot. And so all those kind of things, and did a lot of writing. And so people recognized me and they would come up. And as soon as I had the opportunity, I would switch the conversation from my talking to them, because I wanted to learn from them as much as I could. If they had a question, yes, I'd answer it. But I'd immediately go, "Well, where you been hunting this year? What'd you see? What'd you learn from your hunt this year? What would you do differently if you could do it? Or, does your family hunt?" Oh, and then we get into all kinds of different things. And I had just an absolute blast visiting with people. But in the process of that, I learned about people. And the other side of that thing is I consider myself a very decent observer, because not so much now, but years ago, I'd take my wife and 2 daughters to a shopping mall. Well, while they went and looked at dresses and all these other things, I'd find me a spot somewhere that I could just sit and watch, because I loved watching people, and also taught myself how to be very observant in a lot of those instances by simply I'd look at somebody, turn away, and look at them again. And then before I did, is try to figure out, what were they wearing? How tall were they? All those kind of things. So I became a pretty good observer with that. But it was fun watching the human interactions between husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, friends, all those kind of things. So it was a real learning process for me just to sit and watch people doing that.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's just that still fascinates me. I've been studying human psychology ever since I guess I was in college. But like, what makes us tick? And then one thing that I teach about on the Empowered Life podcast is very much like how to I'm trying to think of the exact word that I saw somebody use on YouTube last night, but it was a guy that was talking about what they teach in the CIA is elicitive, I think is what they call it, or eliciting emotion. And it's basically by making statements, but not by and this is something I've really been a student of lately, based on, I talked about this a lot on that podcast. The book by Chris Voss, which is a fantastic read, or you can listen to the audiobook version. It's a little bit easier than the read sometimes, called Never Split the Difference. And he's all about, he's an former FBI hostage negotiator who's retired now, but we're talking about people's lives were at stake at this point. And he would always just make statements and basically earn the trust of people before he ever ended up, doing anything else with them. And then he would say things like, some anecdotal stories about, if a hostage knows that, a hostage taker, a terrorist knows the hostage's names, it's a very, very, very high likely chance that he will not hurt or let alone kill those hostages, because there's established a human connection. And see, the whole book talks about the wiring that we have in our brains, and the fact that, and I see this also in the instinctual wiring that we see in wildlife as well. we know the sign of when an axis deer's going. I'm sorry, a whitetail deer is going to move because it kind of moves its tail. Every time it makes a move. I mean, you've seen that certainly. You've seen probably millions of whitetails do that, seeing that you're Mr. Whitetail and everything. But it's one of those things where I was just like, it's just amazing that the wiring of all humanity is really the same, even though you have perception, kind of framework that's based on experience that develops all that you become, as a human, based on your and everybody has a different journey. Everybody has a different background. Somebody from Pakistan that was raised Islamic is not going to have the same value system or really the same, experiences to base, their behavior on than somebody from America that eats hot dogs and tacos, and I find that just fascinating. But see that the wiring of our emotional response is very predictable in a lot of ways. And I find that interesting. So that's where I was going with that.
I do too. And you mentioned the deer thing is generally when somebody asks me, how can I learn more about deer? I said, study people. I said, because we're so similar in so many different ways. We're so different in so many different ways. Every deer is an individual. Every human's an individual. So I said, if you want to learn more about deer, study people. If you want to learn more about people, study deer. Because you'll have, if you watch the interactions between those various family groups or just little herds or just an individual and how he acts, you can, if you start really paying attention, my gosh, that reminds me so much of old Joe, or that's Lucy right there. They'll think about it. It's some person that some of them are a little bit more domineering, some of them are a little bit more aggressive, some of them are a little bit more timid. There's so many differences, but so many similarities when you get right down to it between whitetail deer and humans, when you really look at the total aspect of their being.
Right, exactly. And that just amazes me in so many different ways, the fact that if what you learn in nature, and as I said on your show, the fact that you have prey creatures and you have predator creatures, and we don't eat predator creatures usually. You don't hear about a coyote recipe out there, but like prey creatures are designed to eat. Like a lot of people don't, the anti-hunters and the vegans and that kind of stuff of the world that don't believe in animal cruelty. Well, what's coming in the I'd rather eat wild, is my point, because what's coming in the styrofoam wrapper at the store, probably had a worse existence than what was out in the field running free, even a high fence, that you put a bullet or an arrow through. And as hard as that is, like you recently did a doe population, reduction, kind of a management plan. And I thought that was just really brilliant of, okay, just demonstrating like in your social outlets and in your podcast and everything like that, hey, this needs to be done because otherwise these are going to be overpopulated. And as I said about city deer, when I was urban bow hunting for a number of years, they're going to starve themselves out because there's going to be no food unless somebody's pouring a bag of corn out every day. That's just a circle of life. The interesting thing to me is that if we disappeared as a humanity, that would probably balance itself out eventually. If all the high fences were gone and everything like that, I mean, and maybe not, maybe we'd all be overrun with feral hogs. I don't know. But like I say, I'm saying that if humans were gone, like nature has a way of managing itself, and that's fascinating to me, the way that was all put in place by a divine creator who lived outside of the universe and inside the universe and is all around and outside of a universe that we can't even explain, a universe that is forever expanding. Like that's the kind of stuff that boils my noodle, that kind of just bakes my brain. Is I'm like, how enormous is this, thing that we call God, that this creation, this divine force of spiritual good and spiritual evil. And, we see that manifest inside of the things that happen in nature too. I told you the story one time of one of the guys that was at one of the ranches I work with and sell hunts for, and he ended up getting 21 raccoons, and the hogs and coyotes went and fought over them and drug them off to the creek. And there was nothing left at the end of 21 raccoons, but at the same time he was doing some varmint management, and they were I guess hungry that night. I don't know, but either way, like I said, that sounds kind of vicious, but that's a primal nature of nature, whether you like it or not.
It is. It comes back to that all life on earth depends upon the death of another organism, and
like you said earlier,
it's just like I've visited in the past, or maybe visited in the proper term, but debated, it would be a better term, with vegans or the vegetarians, and they go, how, and I said, look, and I'd be a little bit more graphic than I'll be here, but I said, what do you eat? And they go, well, I eat lettuce and I eat beans. I said, what lettuce? I said, have you ever torn a leaf of lettuce and see that little clear stuff comes out? I said, that's their blood. That's their blood. And I said, you eat beans? Like you talking about like peas or beans?
Legumes or whatever.
Those are embryos. I said, you are destroying that life before it's even had the opportunity to experience life,
Wow.
And so and it was interesting because some people just went right above their head, and others go, oh my gosh, I had never really thought about that. I said, so it's really no difference whether that animal, whether it's an organism that has eyes or not. I said that those plants that you're eating, I said, there's fertilizer in the soil because something died. That's what it grew from. And so it comes right down to, regardless of what you eat or whatever, you do want to eat, death is involved in it, kind of thing.
Something has to die for you to live. In other
Something
words.
has to die so that what you live off of can also live, kind of thing.
Right.
The interesting thing about some of the wildlife things that you were talking about is that if you remove man off the face of the earth and let the animals come back, what would happen is that you would have this huge build of prey, and then you'd have this huge buildup of predators. Well, what would happen in the buildup of the prey animals? They destroy the habitat. The habitat being the food, the water, the plants, the vegetation, that bugs for birds or those kind of things, or butterflies would not be here. Simply after one or two of those, simply because there's no habitat for them. There's nothing for them to make a living off of it. And then what happened eventually, the primary, most of the prey species would die off, and the predators, because there's a lot of food, they would build up. Well, then all of a sudden, there's no food for them.
There's nothing for them to eat. Exactly.
So then they die off. So you have this huge cyclic type of thing of predator prey kind of thing, hoping that a species didn't totally go away because of the changes in habitat and being eaten up totally by predators. We do as man, and God gave us providence over the animals. It's our duty, because to me, of what He did there, to say you have providence over these animals for us to properly manage those animals, be it livestock, be it wildlife, so that everything benefits. So that some of the reason we had the doe, which we'd call our venison procurement hut.
Yes. I've used that word before to myself. Yes. Venison procurement mission. I understand that.
And so with doing that, we're keeping that habitat healthy, so that not just the white-tailed deer survive, but the cottontail, the rats, the mice, the snakes, the small predators, the large predators, the songbirds, all the insects that are out there that provide food for birds, so that there's seed for those birds that are seed eaters. So it's up to man to try to manage the habitat so that everything benefits at the same time. And that's, to me, is one of the reasons why hunting is so important.
It's amazing. Like I've never really heard a wildlife biologist like yourself explain what would happen if humanity wasn't here managing all this. But you're right. That's one reason why we're here with the birds and the fish and everything like that, is to keep everything kind of regulated and check and manage that. And a lot of people use the word management when it comes to deer and that kind of stuff. But I sit there and go, management, I mean, like, a lot of people think of a management buck's a 200-inch deer now, and I'm just like, I remember back in the day where that was like unheard of back when I started hunting in the early 2000s,
It is, but that too is an indication of the health of a deer herd, the size of a buck's antlers, or the weight size of the thing. There are two terms that I really use a lot. One is conservation, the other is preservation. Conservation is the wise use of, and preservation kills, quite
It
frankly.
leads to death, like you've said many times
Right.
on your show. It
It,
leads to death,
those, those are
and
two
that
terms that we need to remember. And honestly, the preservation of, you're not preserving, you're killing in the long run.
right,
And
right,
that's a shame, because we need all varieties of wildlife, and I include fish, and anything that walks, crawls, and there's a lot of wildlife that, as far as I'm concerned, are the little bitty critters that are in the soil and that we never even see. So all those become very important, and it's up to man, as far as I'm concerned, to conserve, meaning to wisely use and manage those properties, or those particular species,
yeah.
or habitat.
Absolutely, and habitat is so important. And you talk about food cover and water a lot in your wildlife biologist talks and that kind of stuff that I've seen you give in person and listen on your podcast that I produce for you. But I think that's one of the main things that hunters or anybody else needs to understand, even if you're a non-hunter and just want to have deer on your property, or anything like that, any kind of wildlife on your property, is making sure you have those elements so they can thrive and survive on your property. Anybody that has a home that has any kind of acreage, that even a backyard, they can entertain these things, so that's my thought on that.
Absolutely. To me, anybody that has ground, and that can be a backyard, or it could be somebody that lives on the 18th floor of a high rise and has got a couple of flower pots sitting on outside where insects and birds can get to them. You're a contributor to wildlife. And so in a way, you're a stakeholder in all this.
Right,
And
exactly.
so to me, think a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more. Try to learn everything that you can about wildlife. Don't follow a trend just because it's a popular trend at the time being. Learn all you can, then make up your own mind. God gave us a great mind, a great brain, and I think He expects us to do that as well too.
Absolutely, and think for ourselves and make our own decisions. It goes back to what I talked about with Jackson years ago. His principle. He said, the kids these days in our modern culture, our modern society, with all these AI tools like Google Gemini and ChatGPT and everything like that, they can find out information on anything, from the palm of their hands, from a phone, like we've never seen before. Like this level of digital technology and information, transfer, between things. He said, we're trying to teach your kids to think independently so they can make the best choices for their lives. He said that back when my kid was like in first grade or kindergarten or first grade. And I thought that was great. I was like, that's what the school should be doing, is teaching kids, the kids that are coming up, so to speak, that are growing up and that are in the school system and that kind of stuff, how to think for themselves, because the information is more abundant than it's ever been. But the problem is, what source are you getting the information from? Is it biased information, or is it like, this is coming from Larry Weishuhn, who's a wildlife biologist who's done this for 50 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, you have so much skills and experience and go around and speak all over the nation and elsewhere, and hunt all over the world and be part of that ecosystem and participate in that ecosystem. And it's not all about just killing for you. You know what I'm saying? That's my whole point of having you as a guest, is I want to show people, okay, here's an honest, integrity-filled, character-filled man that isn't bloodthirsty like so many hunters think that, guys like you are and guys like me are. We're not like that. We actually love wildlife. The other day, I don't think I ever told you the story, but it's beginning of, I guess it's probably November or so. The rut's on. And I run across a spike that a couple in front of me, kind of told me to stop, because they were dragging this spike that got hit by a car somewhere off the road, and it was sad. Okay, and I don't know if I've become a softie as I've gotten older, but this animal is still suffering. So I called my game warden that was in that county that I happen to know from previous experience, and him and I are really good terms. And he basically said, he said, if you have FaceTime, if you have an iPhone, I have an iPhone. He said, if you want to put them down, let's just do it. And by the time I got down to, to do, ready to go on that, he had expired. The spike had expired. And, he said, leave them there. The buzzards will take care of, that. And that's just a circle of life, Dustin. And he said, you did the right thing by calling me, because he said, I had to have an eyewitness of you doing that. So somebody driving across the road didn't think it was poaching deer. But I never had that experience before. But see, driving away from that scene, I was hurt. Like I felt for that animal because I didn't want it to suffer, And
Right.
like a lot of people think that us as hunters don't have a heart, but at the same time, I'm like, that's just part of the way that it works. And one thing I learned at Hunter Ed back in like 2004, when I first took hunter's education as part of my hunting license and getting involved in it. I first started out hunting in what's now Fort Cavazos, but Fort Hood, where we wake up at 3:30 in the morning, and go in and get assigned a hunting area and that kind of stuff and be guided. Unless you're a bow hunter or whatever, but if you were a gun hunter, you were guided. It's probably still that way. It's a civilian hunt program. But I learned in my hunter's ed class is that the biggest thing that is the detriment to wildlife is landscape development, not hunters.
You're exactly.
And like that sunk
right.
in, and I still use that today when I talk to people who may not be familiar with hunting, didn't grow up around it, that kind of stuff, and fishing and anything like that. Okay, our wildlife is being destroyed by people who are buying, these land developers that are buying these tracts of land and subdividing them and putting new homes on there for a profit. And I'm not saying that's all a greedy thing. Everybody's got to make their money, but there goes our wildlife. I was down in downtown streets of New Braunfels the other day, doing some laundry at about 3:00 in the morning, because sometimes I'm a night owl. And I see these does and these fawns out on the sidewalk of downtown New Braunfels. I'm not even making this up. They're crossing the street when there's no traffic and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, they used to live here free before we built all this back in the 1800s.
Absolutely. The urban sprawl that we have is years ago, before we had all the land satellite mapping and all that kind of stuff. One of my jobs with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, we got a little 152 Cessna plane and with a county map, and we flew adjacent transects over a lot of counties, including a lot of those up in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And when we did that, you'd fly over municipalities, and then there'd be a large stretch of open country of farming and ranching and all those kind of things, and you would mark where there were houses. Kind of now here, not too very recently, or actually very recently, I meant to say, I was up in North Dallas and drove over same areas that we flew across between the towns. The only way that you can tell where one city stops and one ends, or one ends, one starts, is the city limit sign. And this stretches on for miles and miles and miles and miles. And there's no telling, how much habitat has been destroyed by all that kind of thing as far as wildlife is concerned. That's life. And what happens there in those kind of situations, it becomes so much more important that where there is land, that it is properly managed, that the deer herd is controlled so they don't destroy the habitat, so that there's going to be food for birds and butterflies and all those other kind of things.
Right. They coexist.
Exactly. Those situations becomes really even more important than it has in the past from a conservation, again, going back to that wise use of the land to make it produce a crop of wildlife for both recreational and consumer, but also aesthetics kind of thing. So,
right.
All that, you're right. There's been, and I'm not one who I've been on a golf course twice in my life.
I was about to say golf courses next. It's so funny. You and I are so the same way.
The only time I followed my dad with a set of coon hounds across a golf course one time years ago when I was a little kid. And then one year I hunted on a golf course on an Indian reservation in Alberta, simply because they had cleared everything off and there was green there, and it was the only green area that wasn't covered with 5 foot of snow. So I did those things, but those particularly golf course things like that, and where we can just do nothing but concrete, where they go in and remove large areas of trees and grass and replace it with concrete and pavement. Those really have a huge impact. The other side of that is years ago, when farming wasn't as clean as what it is now, meaning there were fence rows and lots of quail and doves that utilize those areas. And we didn't necessarily have a monoculture of a particular plant. Now we have monocultures of particular plants that go from fence line to fence line. There is no wildlife habitat there along the fence line like there once was. There's very limited at best food outside of maybe for hogs that invade those areas, as far as other wildlife is concerned. So
right.
all those things play, and again, that's why I advise people to learn as much as you can before you form an opinion about what's good, what's bad, and and then find out what you can do. Again, we're talking about this urbanization of wildlife or rural lands, and there are little things that, even again, if you have a yard, there are things that you can do. Plant some flowers, by golly, that butterflies can utilize, and let those caterpillars eat a little bit of that stuff so they can farm those butterflies and moths, and for the future kind of thing.
Right.
You can have a great impact just by doing some of that. And the more people that we get involved in these cities to do those kind of things, realize displace a lot of wildlife, larger wildlife. There are little things they can do for the insects and maybe for the birds, the other animals out there.
Well, and I want to touch on too, like something that I've seen, kind of like the neighborhood gardens. I think that's a great idea. That attracts butterflies, those kind of things in an urban environment. Because I live, back in the Austin metro area. I recently moved back here, and there's a lot of those, especially in East Austin, where there's a lot of kind of the urban professionals kind of moving out there and tiny homes and those kind of things, and really tiny home communities that have like a shared community garden, or just a garden for anybody that is homeless or whatever that wants to come. But the thing is, you're expected to replant whatever you take in a lot of cases, and those kind of things. You kind of like you harvest and then you regrow. And I also want to touch back on your childhood and kind of a correlation I made. One of my earliest memories is going down. My maternal grandfather passed away when I was, I guess, in my mid-20s, 2005. My maternal grandfather died when I was 1986, when I was about, I guess 7 years old. My parents didn't even tell me he was gone until the funeral, and that was the hardest part for me. Like I said, I feel like that was a disturbance to me, like with grandfather, But both of these grandfathers took me down to the same place, one of these little creeks, on the Canal River, and my maternal grandfather would run trot lines there. Years later, my paternal grandfather would go down there. We would dig red wigglers. Did y'all go dig red wigglers for the fishing, or? I think you get a kick out of that.
I'm laughing because the property that I grew up on, which had been in our family since the 1860s, and thankfully we still have it. But yes, we had the earthworms that some of them they weren't really the red wigglers. Some of these were like 1.5 feet long almost. I mean, they were actually huge. And so we can go dig 3 or 4 of those kind of worms, and we could fish pretty much all day long.
Yeah, you dug it right off the land. That's totally living off of the land right there, using a resource that's on the bank to catch something in the river. I love that whole, the way that all that works, because it really makes sense, to me, of, okay, that's really roughing it a little bit. You're not going to a grocery store and buying a carton of worms. You're digging your own bait, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's really like, being a true conservationist, is using what you got right in front of you. You and I both do TV show work. Yours, of course, are more prolific than mine. But one of the things of the team that I run with Hogger Boys, and that whole kind of variety network that I'm putting together of different content air on Carbon TV, is that use what you got. If you want to go hunt a coyote, get you got a 30-06 you use deer for. I mean, that'll be fine. But I mean, like I say, make the best of the resources you have. You don't have to go out and buy the brightest new scope or the best new everything, and all these kind of things that you're sold on TV in our commercial society. This is buy. Just use what you got in your garage, at least to get started and to kind of upgrade as you go. You don't have to go spend $100,000 to get a boat and everything like that. To go catch a fish off of a bank, you know what I'm saying? And that's one of the favorite things I still do with my son, to talk about the outdoors some more, is just go jerk perch. You and I talked about that on our podcast. Like, we make a little competition out of it, and as it warms up a little bit here in the spring, I'm going to take him outside, and we're going to go, there's a little lake, Lakewood Park, a little bit of community park that's kind of buried in the back of a neighborhood. And it's a nice big lake. I don't know how long it's been there, but it's run by the city of Leander, It's funny. I mean, I caught a catfish on my grandfather's old rod and reel, and it almost drug it into the water. And I darn near fell into the water to grab that one because I wasn't losing that rod and reel. That was his.
No.
And it was like an old spin cast, like a Kmart special. We're talking like when Kmart was still around, more prolifically. And but the thing is, I retired that rod. I'll never fish with it again because I caught a 3-pound catfish on there, landed it.
Oh my goodness!
And my son decided to like stay in that day, and not, play his video games and not come out with me. And I was like, you missed an absolutely amazing story. This fish drug my rod almost into the water. I went into the water to get it, to save the rod, and I caught the fish. So, I mean, it's just stuff like that. It's just little outdoor experiences. One of the best ones I want to share with you, and I think I may have mentioned this to you before, but Jackson and I are fishing. He's a lot younger at this point, and so than the catfish story. But basically, like he's, I don't know, 7, 8 years old. We're going out to Brushy Creek Park, which is a local park here in Cedar Park. And it was an old Texas Parks and Wildlife holding pond, like where they would stock fish and that kind of stuff there. So anyway, it's kind of a community lake, kind of an unknown. It's got a hike and bike trail and everything else. A lot of people go down there to do things in the outdoors, ride their bikes or walk or hike or run or whatever. But they've got a really nice big lake out there. I don't know how many acres it is. It's not very deep. And we caught a panfish, bluegill or whatever.
Right.
And as we were reeling it in, this giant bass comes up and grabs it and runs off with it and then breaks the line consequently, because we obviously didn't have a hook on him, but he didn't spit that one out. But it was my experience to show him. That'll probably never happen again in my lifetime. But that's an experience that we had together that bonded us as father and son. And I think that's what the outdoors does as well, such as like my Crosswater Outfitters ministry that I'm getting back involved in again. Crosswater Outfitters is a Christian fishing ministry, and one of the things that we do, aside from Friends and Neighbors events and other events in the community, is serve the soldiers of Fort Cavazos, used to be Fort Hood, and that's therapeutic for those people. That's therapeutic for those people for those soldiers, for our military, to go in and let go of their PTSD and let go. It's therapeutic to be in the outdoors, whether you're just going boating, you don't care about catching a fish, but you're in the outdoors, in the elements, in God's creation. And it's just a beautiful thing if you're, in the outdoors. So earlier this fall, I got one time to hunt with my son, take him out to this lease in Llano, this day lease. And I've been selling hunts for this gal that lives out there for a while. And, I just got to sit next to him in the blind in nature. And that was such a healing experience for me, because since the divorce that I had, I hadn't been able to hunt with him for 2 years. And like, we got to just sit, and we didn't really even care about shooting anything. He wanted to shoot a turkey. It never really showed up. But like, it was the therapeutic for us as a bonding experience as father and son to be sharing that time in the outdoors. I didn't care if we saw anything, I mean, there were deer and that kind of stuff there, but he was just happy to be outdoors with his dad. And I was like, how many kids miss that opportunity that the dads aren't involved in their lives and that kind of stuff? Where are all the dads at? Take a kid hunting and fishing. I always advocated that on the Best of the Outdoors. I still do. Is just making the time count. Don't be too busy to get out in the outdoors. That is your therapy. That is, I like, let all my problems go out to the water. My dad would often say, he said, if you give Dustin a glass of tea, he'll try to find a fish in it. I mean, I was that hardcore in fishing before I got into hunting. That's just kind of my thing. But I think that the outdoors, if you approach it the right way, whether you hunt, fish, or whatever, or don't, it is just a therapeutic place to be in nature. And that is really where all of this originated, to see how the ecosystem works, to see how butterflies relate to caterpillars, to see how an axis deer, I was on a call earlier today, talking about axis deer and black bucks and stocking this guy's ranch for the exotics that I sell. And we made a deal on the whole thing. And he said, oh, will they fight with each other? I said, no. I said, these exotics, they know each other and they know each other's type. And the black buck doesn't fight with the axis. They kind of stay on their own and do their own thing. And an example of that is the barn pasture at my the ranch I work with on that property. Is like 2 acres, and it's like Noah's Ark. there's all kinds of aoudad and axes and sights, everything like that running around, and they all just kind of mind their own business and do their own thing, stay in their own herds. And that's a perfect experience of 2 acres and a high fence. It's going to be, that's just the barn pasture that we have. All the stuff that kind of escapes the barn kind of gets recaught. But I mean, there's stuff that doesn't sell, we kick out and and catch it back up if we need to. But it's just a beautiful creation. We have a wonderful world. And even though there's all kinds of decay and depravity and all kinds of sin and death and all these kind of things that are negative, it's just embracing what is this glorious creation that we have.
We are. We're so fortunate just to be alive when you get right down to it. And to me, Mother Nature, which I equate a lot of times to God as well too, it gives us so many opportunities. And it doesn't need to be that you're carrying a rifle and going out to shoot something, or as you mentioned, having a fishing rod and trying to catch something. All those are important, and they're great fun, and they create memories that'll never be forgotten, particularly such as what you mentioned with your son. And I've done the same thing with my 2 daughters, my 4 grandsons, and my granddaughter. And I've got, as of yesterday of being recorded, I've got a second great grandson. There's already been one, the grandson and a little granddaughter. But those, quite frankly, people are going to probably look at me strange and want to say, well, I've already put a rifle and a knife aside for them.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Once they get a little bit older, the good Lord willing, I will be here and I'll teach them. And if not, I know that their grandmothers and I know that their moms and dads will teach them about life, about how, about the things, how to be careful and all those other kind of things. But to me, that it's passing on that tradition.
Sure.
And I can't wait I used to take my grandsons hunting with me a lot until they were grown and, now starting to have families of their own. And we still get together and go hunting and fishing whenever we can. But those were such great bonding times. And it gave me the opportunity to get those guys outdoors and to learn about life, not just about what they hear amongst themselves or what they see in school or on TV or, now with all the internet stuff. Yeah. Those are just such great memories. And that I know, because every once in a while I'll talk to them and they'll go, hey, and they call me Popo. They say, hey, Popo, remember the time we were on the FPW ranch and, we got after these deer or we got after turkeys or whatever. And I mean, they'll tell the story and they'll tell you which way the wind was blowing, what was going through their mind, what was happening in their life at the time, all those things. And to me, that is also part of that therapeutic thing that you're talking about with the outdoors, because when I get down, there are 2 things that like everybody else, we've experienced different things that were not the nicest in the world. And Eli's gotten down to 2 things. I go, okay, Laura, where do we go from here? I'll follow your lead. and then I spend time and just, watch birds fly by or watch leaves developing and watch during the fall, watch leaves fall from, die and fall to the ground. And once they hit the ground, it doesn't take long. They'll deteriorate. And guess what? Those nutrients are used again. And that continual cycle that we're talking about at the beginning of this comes back into play.
Exactly. It's a beautiful thing. So I've got one last question for you. What legacy do you want to leave for your grandkids, for your kids? What do you want to be remembered by when you were gone one day?
I think the biggest thing that I remembered is that I cared about them.
Yeah.
And did everything that I could to help them where I could. And sometimes I wasn't able to. But sometimes that also helped them because it made them do different things.
Like independence. Yeah, I kind of gained their independence and learning of their own knowledge. Yeah,
exactly. So to me, that's the greatest legacy as far as I'm concerned. I've been very fortunate to do a lot of things in the outdoors, and there's a lot of articles and books and all that other kind of stuff. But to me, the biggest thing comes down to is how will my family remember me? Will they remember me as a very caring person? Will they remember me as somebody who didn't care about them at all? That just shunned them. Not the case.
So it's more familial for you instead of like, how are you remembered as an outdoor celebrity? Which I know you don't even consider yourself an outdoor celebrity some days.
No.
But I mean, 50 years, between TV and biology work and everything like that. How do you want the greater audience to remember you?
Again, that I cared about wildlife, that I cared about habitat, that I tried to entertain, but entertain in the manner such that they learned something. Most of the stuff that I've ever done in terms of TV, the writing, there's stories there from which to learn. And they're to me, go back to the Bible. The Bible is a lot of parables. It's stories for people to learn from. And to me, that's what a lot of the things that I've wanted to try to get done is that I don't care if 20 years from now somebody remembers who Larry Weishuhn was. Maybe that he or she was a child, and 20 years later, guess what? They remembered something that I had done. Not important and it helped them in their life. Not so much that it helped me with anything or that they remember me, but there was a lesson there that they learned.
Well, and that's the thing. Like for me, it's so selfless of you to say that. It's so selfless for you to, say it's not about me. So many outdoor people like you that have done all the things that you've done, it's all about like, oh, these are all my accomplishments. And I'm guilty of that sometimes too, because I have to prove myself in front of people still that, for notoriety or whatever, just or, in different functions. But for me, it's all about the greater good. It's all about what have I done for my fellow man? How have I helped? How have I added, like, this is the last question that I brought up on your podcast when we did it episode together. How have I added value to somebody else's life? How have I added value to Larry or Luke or any of the clients that I work with, but also personally? How have I added value to my son's life? Okay, how can I add value more to other people's lives? And that's one of the most powerful questions I think you can ask a spouse, a brother, a sister, whoever, a mom or dad, if they're still alive. Don't take that for granted. How can I add value? How can I make your life better? How can I sprinkle sunshine on the world and make God smile?
Some of the greatest things we do, we will never know that we did them.
That's so profound. Wow, that's beautiful. That is so important. Well, we're about at our time here. Let us know how to find you. Tell us about the TV show or Carbon TV Sports Life, all that stuff. Tell me
the best way to learn about me with blogs, the TV shows, the podcast, the books, and everything is LarryWeishuhn.net, and that's spelled lowercase, all run together, LarryWeishuhn.net. They can see all the blogs that I do. I do 2 to 4 a month at least. The TV show can be accessed there, as can be the podcast DSCs, Campfires, and of course, then you mentioned Luke Clayton. Luke and I do radio shows together. We do a Sportsman's Life together, which is a TV show we're talking about on Carbon TV, on YouTube. And then Luke's, all the stuff I do with Luke can also be found on catfishradio.org, his website. Yep.
Well, and also I'm going to be adding the full lineup of all the shows on my website at DustinProjects.com and then BusinessWithDustin.com, my two main websites, and kind of my creator hub and business website, just to showcase you guys too with your whole episode. That's just trying to get to it with all the client work that I've got. But like I said, I'm just. What a gem of a guy you are, and thank you so much for sharing this time with me today, man.
You're very kind, and it was truly an honor to do so. Thank you so very much.